Queridos amigos, comunidad de gente consciente, muy buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches a todos, de acuerdo en la parte del mundo que se encuentren. Hoy quiero compartir con ustedes esta entrevista de altísimo impacto por su nivel de profundidad e información y las dos personalidades, sobre todo, que tenemos aquí adelante en la pantalla. Me refiero a Whitney Webb, a mi criterio, una de las mejores periodistas de investigación del mundo, y al doctor en inteligencia conceptual, ex agente en contrainteligencia militar de la KGB y autor del club Bilderberg con más de 7 millones de copias vendidas, Daniel Stulin, uno de los mejores analistas geopolíticos en este momento a nivel global. La dinámica que va a tomar esta entrevista va a ser muy particular, dado que los algoritmos, tanto en YouTube como en las otras plataformas donde las vamos a compartir, están muy sensibles, ya que se va a hablar en esta entrevista, que va a durar muchísimo tiempo, de la red de trata a nivel global, los vínculos de las élites progresistas a nivel global y su entrelazado con el Partido Comunista Chino, el Vaticano, así como también cómo operan estas redes en concubinato con la familia Clinton, los Obama, los Biden y todo ese tipo de personajes variopintos, elitistas, que ya muchos de ustedes conocen. Es por eso que va a llegar un momento de la entrevista que, cuando consideremos que los algoritmos puedan llegar a censurarnos y bajarnos de la plataforma estos videos, los vamos a colgar en el link de la descripción, tanto en la plataforma de YouTube, y veremos ya en TikTok y demás cómo los podemos dejar de manera que en el mismo título del video se encuentre el link para que ustedes puedan entrar al video y lo puedan disfrutar en esta plataforma de video que es totalmente descentralizada. Me refiero a Vimeo. Así que los dejo con la entrevista en pleno para que ustedes puedan ver. Está, por supuesto, la comparación es en inglés y está traducida al castellano en forma de subtítulos. Nos vemos en una próxima oportunidad y espero que puedan tomar nota del video, grabarlo y compartirlo absolutamente con todos sus contactos y en todas las redes para que llegue esta información y le den un me gusta gigantesco a este video y destrocen, por supuesto, la sección de comentarios.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. This is Daniel Estrelal. Welcome to Estrelal.media. Today we have a friend of mine, Whitney Webb. Well, for me, one of the best journalists in the world. And we're going to talk about her new upcoming book. It's called One Nation Under, not God, but Under Blackmail, published at Trine Day Press, also my publisher. I think is the only publisher in the world, Chris Milligan, would actually dare to publish something like that. Well, first of all, Whitney, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks. Sorry it took so long. We were trying to connect earlier, but the book took up a lot of my time, and it turned out to be 2 books. Well, so that's probably why.
This is the book. This is a monster book. Monster because of its size, and also because, again, I can't think of anyone else who could write something like this. So, and again, this isn't about Epstein. This is a treatise of over 100 years of cloak and dagger operations by the smorgasbord of unsavory characters, from political operatives on both sides of the Atlantic to spooks, drug dealers, money launderers, armed traffickers, Russian mafia, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, when I was preparing this interview, I was thinking to myself, we can't talk about everything. I mean, we don't have the time. So we're going to talk about a few little things in the book, little, quote unquote. Let's start with the Wexner Foundation. I know people want to know about, the pedophiles involved, the Clintons, et cetera, but we can't talk about them without understanding the background to the story. So my first question is, what is a Wexner Foundation, and how are they involved with the Maxwells and Jeff Epstein?
Okay, so the Wexner Foundation is relevant because Jeffrey Epstein was a trustee there, and a very influential one. So influential that he actually ended up taking the place of Leslie Wexner's own mother off of the board. And when she tried to get back on, the Wexner Foundation, under Epstein's thumb, ended up suing her, who is Wexner's own mother and supposedly co-founded the foundation with him in the early 70s. So that tells you a lot about Epstein's influence already over the Wexner Foundation by the early 90s. I mean, that's very significant for him to have that role there. According to Epstein, he and Bella Wexner settled by having the Wexner Foundation sort of divided into I guess you could say, two fiefdoms, one sort of more interest to Epstein and one of more interest to Bella Wexner, though it's not exactly clear which one is which. But the Wexner Foundation is significant because a lot of people, hear the name Wexner Foundation, so they assume that it's like a philanthropic donation. It donates to specific things. But the Wexner Foundation is actually different in a lot of key ways, and that's really important to point out because it's basically a quote unquote philanthropy, but what it does instead of donating necessarily in mass to various institutions, and it does that too, but its main focus is developing leaders and developing leadership. So you could sort of see the Wexner Foundation. It's in some ways related to sort of the same model overseen by the World Economic Forum, the Young Global Leaders Program there. For example, the Wexner Foundation philanthropies are very focused on training leaders specifically. It started off really focusing on training leaders in the Jewish North American community, but also very significantly from the late 80s to today, has invested a lot in training people in Israel's government that go on to have very prominent positions in Israel's government and also in the U.S.-Israel lobby, like AIPAC, which have a lot of influence in U.S. domestic politics, and for decades have been connected to very controversial espionage activity, to put it nicely. I guess that they've been involved in various Israeli espionage scandals in the U.S. throughout its history, and you have the Wexner Foundation being a common thread there. So, in the book, I didn't really go in and say, here's all the alumni from like the Wexner Israel Fellowship, which is a major part of the Wexner Foundation's activities itself. I just,